Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Saad Baig with us tonight. He is a senior government relations consultant at Strategy Corp. He's a gentleman that I've followed for quite a while now in Mississauga politics, Ontario politics. He's well plugged in, knows what's going on, and now he's got a job with a major consulting company to actually explain what's going on to a lot of people. And so I thought it'd be great to check in with him to see what he thinks about politics for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's been a year since the Mississauga Mayoralty by-election. It's been 3 years since the general election. A year from now will be the municipal election in Mississauga, Toronto, all municipalities across Ontario. And he also did a really interesting post about the provincial election. And so I thought it'd be good to check in with him on that. Saad, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. So let me ask you, it's been a year since the municipal by-election. You posted about development fees and some of the changes that are occurring in Mississauga in regards to development fees. I've been told that the reception from developers was quite good, but there hasn't been a lot of activity. What's your sense of how Carolyn Parrish, the new mayor of Mississauga, is doing, and particularly maybe talk about development fees?
Sure. So I think Carolyn's really taken on some of the big issues that our residents face in the city. Obviously, housing affordability is a key issue that she talked about in her campaign. And I'm actually quite impressed at her ability to bring together the stakeholders and really dive into the specific challenges. As many folks in the sector appreciate, cost is a big conversation. Projects are simply not penciling. It means when you run the math on your development economics, it's not feasible to build. So the immediate measure that any order of government can look at has to do with the government imposed fees and charges. Depending on which metrics you look at, I've seen numbers that say up to 30% of the embedded cost in a housing development is related to a government imposed fees or charge or some sort of regulatory impact. So it's good on Carolyn to bring together stakeholders. Obviously, these issues are complex. They're not as simple as just changing one thing. It's a bit of a whack-a-mole effect. So one of the considerations out there is, okay, if you're not going to impose upfront development charges on developers, who's going to pay for it? At the end of the day, somebody has to pay for it. Either the property tax base is going to pay for it, the developers are going to pay for it. Perhaps there's a way to spread those costs over a broader base through a user base. That's a conversation out there. Or the provincial or federal tax payer is going to pay for it. So I think fundamentally, I think Carolyn's done a good job. She's really taken on some of the bigger issues. She's been, from what I understand, she's been doing a lot of work behind the scenes with the different orders of government. It's a different style than I think Mississauga has seen. In the past, Mississauga has done a good job marketing itself as a key destination for foreign direct investment, really marketing our ability to attract big businesses. Now it seems like the leadership style has shifted more towards let's work with the different orders of governments behind the scene and tackle some of these issues. So I think overall, first year in, give her an A.
Hey, well, that's pretty good. So development fees have been reduced significantly. In Vaughan, I think they're down by 50%. Mark Carney, the new prime minister, is talking about a reduction in development fees as well. Is this a general trend you think is going to happen across the province or across the country?
I think the conversation is happening for sure. We've pivoted away from a couple of years ago when there was an openness to this conversation to really look at how we pay for growth-related infrastructure. The sides were pretty entrenched. It seems like people are at the table and you're seeing municipalities come out and say, you know what, we're going to take a look at our fees. However, it's not as simple as that. We really need other orders of government to come in and fill the gap. If you just very simplistically look at it, what happens if you take away a revenue that a municipality needs to build things like water or wastewater from the development process? Well, guess what? They're going to have to pay for that some other way, or they just push back projects. So I think fundamentally shifting to a process where you just reduce development charges without a way to figure out how you're going to pay for that infrastructure is a flawed concept. You need to really look at it holistically. Does it make more sense for the provincial taxpayer to take over those costs? Does it make more sense for the user base to take over those costs? I think those conversations are happening. Mark Carney's out there saying on multi-unit housing, he's going to reduce development charges by 50%, but obviously the federal government doesn't have jurisdiction to amend the Development Charge Act in Ontario or other provinces. So I'm sure they're going to be looking at other mechanisms such as their funding programs, potentially making it a condition of those. So I'm glad those conversations are happening, but they're not as simplistic, I think, as some stakeholders make it out to be.
So, Hazen McCallion was really one of the first advocates of development charges, and she said that growth needs to pay for growth, and so that's why she put on those development charges. Another former mayor of Mississauga said that development fees are paid for by rich developers, and Toronto still has astronomical development fees. They've gone up by like 1,000% in the last decade. So, tell me, who pays development charges? Is it paid for by the developer? Or is it paid for by the consumer?
So development charges are levied on the developer for each unit. There's a different rate for different types of units. At the end of the day, the developer has to hit their margin to make a project work. They have to go get lending from the private market. Lenders require a certain amount of prudence in their numbers so they can ensure they have appropriate protection. So if the project doesn't hit a certain level of viability with the margin built in, it doesn't proceed. So the price is determined by that. But if your cost goes up and you can't hit your margin requirements, then you have to bump up your price. So I think it's fundamentally, it makes housing less affordable because your cost of building goes up.
So it's paid for by the consumers. And the way that I've explained it to people is it's very similar to Trump's argument that tariffs are paid for by the foreign companies. They're not. They're paid for by the American taxpayer. And it's because everyone just jacks up their prices to pass the tariffs on to other people. Carbon tax, as we all seen at the gas tank, is the same sort of thing. The gas companies didn't pay the carbon tax. They passed it on to us, the consumer. And development charges are passed on in the price of homes or townhouses or condos to the ultimate purchaser. And I think that's why it was one of the most regressive taxes that we had in our tax system. It was effectively paid for by young people that were coming into the marketplace, renters that wanted to become homeowners, immigrants that moved to Canada and wanted to buy a home. And I think it was wrong. Now, Saad, in the United States, what they do is they issue municipal tax bonds that finance infrastructure and then pay it off over a long period of time, 30, 40 years on a tax advantage basis, so that people that are investing in them actually charge half the interest rate that they would otherwise charge because of the tax structure that's applied. But yet it's paid for therefore by the local property owner. And so when you think about the tax structure, half of it is paid for by the federal government and the state government because they're reducing the taxes that they would otherwise receive on the interest rate, or at least half of the financing charge of it. But ultimately, it's paid for by the whole community. The whole society pays for that, those sewers, those schools, those fire stations, things like that. Do you think that's fair? Is that a better way to do things?
So I think there needs to be a broader conversation around the whole growth pays for growth conversation, right? It seemed to be the matter of fact perspective out there a few years back. But in today's economic climate, growth cannot pay for growth because growth is not being built right now. The projects don't pencil. So if you keep on adding the same amount of cost, they don't work. So whether it be some sort of municipal bond issuance model, whether it be the province takes over the cost of underground infrastructure for growth related projects, whether it be spread it over the the user base and move it off upfront developments, there's different options out there. The one fundamental reality we all need to be mindful of is that councils don't want to raise property taxes. So if we do a simplistic solution that says we're just going to cut the amount of revenue you can collect from DCs, well, you're going to be in a really tricky situation. I don't think it's in the interest of the development sector either, because fundamentally councils will make tough decisions. They may push out necessary infrastructure that's required to service some of these projects. So that's not the solution. Just cut DCs and walk away without a more holistic way to think about it. There is a legitimate conversation happening right now on, is there a way to use a utility type model? The province is consulting on it. What that means is, as opposed to taking part of the cost and putting it on new development, you take all of the costs and put in the user base, amortize it over a period of time, and just recover those costs. Does that mean the user base cost goes up for water, wastewater? Yes. When you're taking additional costs and putting in a user base, it does mean their costs go up, but that's a conversation that's happening.
But doesn't that make sense? If people use water, they should pay for water.
It does make sense. But if you go back to 2017 when the hydro, or 2016 when the hydro issue was a big conversation in the province of Ontario, and at one point the Kathleen Wynne government was taking so much heat on that, they had to come out with a 30% off reduction. So my fear with an approach that fully passes it back onto some sort of utility model is that downstream, the provincial government of the day is going to realize they can't take the heat for water bills going up, and they'll come in and start subsidizing them. And you're going to have the same situations you have with electricity right now, where the provincial government subsidizes a significant amount of the cost. So what's the point of creating an artificial temporary user pay when you're going to go back to provincial pay anyway, or partial provincial pay?
So there's one taxpayer, and so what you're saying is that because of opposition to water user fees, people demanded that the provincial government pay for it, but then they're
electricity back then it was electricity, but same conversation.
Okay, but then they're just paying for it through their income taxes. So why is paying it through income taxes better than paying it through a water bill or an electricity bill?
I think it's the same rationale as why is paying for your healthcare through income tax is better than having a user pay because you use it. There's no difference between the two rationales. There will be people who
I disagree. I disagree on that. Really? I think that we as a society have decided that healthcare is a right. I don't know if electricity is a right. I think electricity, if you're using twice or three times as much of it, you should pay a little bit more, if not twice or three times as much.
You could make the same argument in water consumption, which is the biggest cost of development charges. I think politically it's not going to work. Like, I don't disagree with your point, but politically, I don't see a scenario where you're going to move to a full user pay model on water, wastewater. Either the local councils or the provincial government, whoever's authority is going to buckle once the price is going up. So it may sound good in theory, but I don't think the political reality of that rollout is going to end up in the same scenario as people want it to be. So then I go to the point, if you're going to get to a point where effectively the province is going to pay anyway, why don't we have that conversation right now? And here's an idea. I'm just throwing this out there. What if the province uploads water, wastewater infrastructure? If they upload it, then they don't have their fiscal impact for paying for it goes down because then it's amortized on their books. What that means is their cost is spread over the life cycle of the asset. That's how accrual accounting works in the province of Ontario, as opposed to doing transfer payments to a municipality, which hits you in year. That may be a better option.
I think that amortizing it over time makes a ton of sense, and paying for it all day one doesn't make sense. And so on that, in that basis, I agree. And that's how utilities infrastructure servicing is paid for and funded in the United States, and frankly in many places around the world. And that's how we pay for our highways, et cetera. We amortize it over time. That's how we're going to pay for a lot of our military expenditures. That said, I think that it makes a lot of sense that there be a user pay. If someone is going to water their lawn every single day, why should they pay the same as someone who doesn't water their lawn every single day? If someone is going to be using, a lot more water because they got a swimming pool, because they got a washing machine, because of whatever, why should they be paying the same as through their income tax as someone that doesn't do that? So I think that water, electricity is something that, should be a user fee. Gas is a user fee. Natural gas is a user fee. Why is water and electricity different than that? Maybe not all. Maybe some of the increase in infrastructure should be funded by society, but I think it makes sense. And that's how Electra, some of the agencies around some of the companies, entities that are municipally owned around the Greater Toronto Area actually pay for their services. So I think that's what makes sense. And paying it through the income tax system, I think it's a way of hiding because it's part of a whole huge amount of revenue and expenses, and some of it's deficit financed, and the debt grows, and people sort of don't realize that they're paying for it, but they're still paying for it. And one of the nice things about user fees is you're paying for it. That said, I completely agree with you that healthcare should not be a user fee, and I think it should be free. Anyway, we got to take a break. We're going to take a break for some messages. We're going to come back in just 2 minutes with Saad Baig. With Strategy Consultants, a very smart, politically knowledgeable individual, very involved in what's going on in our province and our city, talking a little bit more about what's happening in Mississauga and Peel and the GTA and the province of Ontario. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Really pleased to have Saad Baig with me tonight. He is a consultant, a strategy consultant with a strategy organization called Strategy Corp. So lots of strategies in that description, and someone who I've watched in Mississauga politics, Ontario politics over the years. He's a very knowledgeable young gentleman, and I think he's going to be someone that you're going to be watching in the future because this guy knows what's going on, and he's a really deep thinker. And so I appreciate you joining me today, Saad. So. Peel police budget went up by 23%. 23% this year. And yet the mayor voted against it. What's going on there, buddy? What's going on?
So one of the conversations that's been out there for some time across North America is policing budgeting and whether the core issue around whether the best way to address crime is increase budgets for the police force or look at some of the more root causes, right? So obviously numbers like 23% are not sustainable for the property tax base. So it was interesting to see the mayor of Mississauga, Mayor Parrish, really put her neck out there on that issue. She sat on the police board. As many of your viewers will know, she decided to step down from the police board. Because in her capacity as a member of the police board, she couldn't speak out against the police budget, and she vehemently opposed the police budget. Went through a whole process. It was a contentious issue on council. If you watch some of the debates, you had one side really hammering the whole issue around the level of crime that we have in Peel and the uptick in recent years, and the need to really resource our policing. And you had another side, I guess, two conversations on the opposing side. One is, well, it's not about the number, it's about where you're allocating those resources. You can actually have a reduction in crime if you're addressing some of the more upfront causes or root causes behind crime. And then you also had the folks who just wanted a reduction, didn't want the hit on their property tax base. So very interesting, very heated debate. It also includes another element, which many of your viewers may know, is the allocation of how the police budget is distributed between Brampton and Mississauga. Mississauga's perspective is that I believe 62% of the current budget is on Mississauga taxpayers. But if you look at it by population or by level of crime, Mississauga says we're about 50-50. So we need to relook at the distribution. Obviously, it is not in the interest of the taxpayers of the city of Brampton to pay more. So that's the conversation that's going to be happening over the next little while. The mayor has made this one of her key issues in her discussions with the provincial government. She's looking to reallocate that share, and I don't know if she's going to take another crack at reducing the budget as next cycle, but I wouldn't be too surprised.
So, what do you think about this argument in regards to some of this the causes of this increased crime? And one of the biggest increases, I understand, is domestic violence. Huge increase in domestic violence, and that's what a lot of the calls are for. The other is carjackings, home invasions, things like that. And so something's gone wrong in Mississauga and Peel, such that you've got these massive increases. I can't remember, is it 150 or 300 new frontline officers on the street that are part of this budget? Is that the right solution to deal with those issues?
So I don't know if the carjackings issue can be solved by adding more police locally. Like fundamentally, you have to look at the market, right? There is a market for people to make money by stealing cars here and oftentimes shipping them abroad. And you're not going to have police on the ground in every street in the middle of the night trying to track who's stealing whose car. By the time they got a call, the car's gone already. The way you solve that issue is you cut the snake at its neck. So the issue is at the ports. And this is well documented. The governments have talked about it. In the last set of conversations, the talk was around how few of those containers are actually scanned. So the government is trying to buy some more equipment to scan those safe shipping containers to see if there's cars in there or not. And if you cut the snake at the head over there, then you don't need to worry about folks on the ground. So I don't think the carjacking issue is related to policing. Domestic violence is a really serious issue. And that's something that needs to be tackled. I'm not going to pretend to have a solution for how to address domestic violence, but having more police officers respond quicker, can that be helpful? Of course. But I'm sure the experts in this space will give a whole range of other aspects that we all should be investing in to be able to address that issue.
If someone's got a 23% increase in a budget item, and policing is obviously an incredible area for that increase to occur. I think you got to look and you got to say, if last year's number was right, then this year's number is clearly wrong. Nothing can go up by 23% in a year. And if this year's number is right, then last year's number and the prior year's numbers were really wrong. And so we should be looking really at people who have been on that police services board and or running the police and saying, what the blank did you do wrong in the last couple of years? And should you be in charge of our city and our police department if you can underfund the police so dramatically that we've had this massive increase in crime such that we now need a 23% increase? And we haven't had that conversation. I don't think that's been part of what people have been talking about. Versus, we have been, we can't afford the 23% increase. Well, I don't think we can afford a 23% increase. And you're quite correct. It's not sustainable. But if we need it and it's the right amount and the police services board votes in favor and the council votes in favor, then I think we need it, which means that everyone in charge in the past failed and they should take the responsibility for that. What do you think about that?
So that's a very complicated issue to unpack because fundamentally, does the police need more resourcing? I personally agree that they do. But from the police's perspective, the police needs more resourcing. From a governance body's perspective, who needs to allocate resources to a variety of different things, and they need to balance in priorities, they have a different perspective. Like, of course, you can have more officers. Of course, you can have better technology. It is the job of the police department and the police board to ask for more and more resources. Just like in any organization, each department head wants to go and make his or her case
for
to get
more is
more
one
resources.
thing, but 23% more, that's unbelievable. No one can justify that on a sustainable basis.
Yeah. So my point is, it is not the police force or the police board's fault. Their job is to get the most resources from the people that pay them. It is the governance body that looks after them to allocate resources among all the different interests. So they, I think, need to look at it from a macro perspective and say, if we have X amount of money available between all these priorities, how much should go to police? How much should go to prevention? And I don't know if they're doing that holistic analysis.
So what should happen?
So this is an Appeal or Mississauga issue. This is an issue across police jurisdictions in North America. I think fundamentally we need more education and awareness and more research into things, upfront investments that reduce crime. I think the province has stepped up. They've invested more in policing. But as a set of decision makers, we need to be more sophisticated in our decision making. Of course, emotionally, we want to invest more in police. And emotionally, when we hear about these really horrendous situations, we want to give the police more money. But can we do something else? Can we have more youth hubs? Can we have more situations where people who engage in these types of behaviors don't end up in these types of behaviors? Like youth crime is on the up. I go on TikTok or some of these neighborhood apps and you see literally young kids, 17, 18, 19, breaking into jewelry stores. You see those videos. Why is that happening? Is it because they don't see opportunities for themselves and their default to this behavior? So what are some of the causes behind that?
Youth unemployment is something like
complicated
50%
issues
right now.
Exactly. So these are complicated issues that have variety of different causes. It's not as simplistic as let's just keep on giving them more money to the police.
Okay, so let's talk about this funding methodology that you talked about or you addressed. The population is effectively equal today. That said, the market value assessment on Mississauga is substantially more than Brampton. So property values are higher, and the way that we allocate property tax is not based on user fees, based on people. It's based on market value, and so therefore this argument that Mississauga is making, and I'm a Mississauga resident, so I'd like to pay less. But the reality is, you think about Toronto. If we said there's more crime and more people in the Jane and Finch area than in Forest Hill, and so therefore Jane and Finch should pay more for the policing versus Forest Hill, everyone would say that doesn't make any sense. Forest Hill is a lot richer, and they should fund based on their income and their wealth and their property values a lot more of the police budget because that's good for society. So how can we actually have a reasonable discussion in regards to Toronto, and then all of a sudden we turn around to Mississauga and say, "Oh, there's more crime in Brampton, and there's more people in Brampton, or equal number of people, and so therefore we should change the funding methodology and change it to population rather than market value assessment, and change the whole attitude of the way that we allocate police budget." Respond.
But the difference is Toronto is a one-tier municipality. Here we're talking about two different municipalities. So of course their respective local councils are going to have if I can say it, protectionist type approaches on these, where they're protecting the
Oh,
interests
so
of
we
the
should all be like
local
Donald Trump
taxpayers.
and be xenophobic and think about only
That's
Mississauga.
not what this is. But I mean, fundamentally, you're asking a broader question around the role of regional governments. What does a regional government do? It distributes cost over a larger base, and sure, some areas will be winners, some areas will be losers. That is the point of having your costs and planning and operations spread over a larger base. Obviously, those individual areas that are winners and losers are gonna not be the winners are gonna be happy and the losers are not gonna be happy, and that's what we're seeing over here. Fundamentally, speaking on this particular issue in Mississauga's perspective is that we've outgrown a two-tier framework, and we deserve to be our own single-tier city.
So you think we made a mistake, or at least the provincial government made a mistake in stopping the Mississauga separation from Peel? Is that correct?
I don't know. So there's many ways to look at this. Is it more efficient for the entire system to have three different functions? That's usually not how efficiency works, right? Efficiency usually works when you roll it all up. So from a pure theoretical perspective, would it have been a more if you're trying to draw efficiencies within the entire whole, probably would have made more sense to have a city appeal than have three different local functions. However, the politics of that are challenging, right? And so from a Mississauga only perspective, I think their position is right for their own interest. From a provincial perspective,
so in the 1990s, there was a GTA task force chaired by one of the smartest people in municipal government and academia at the time, Ann Golden, who recommended that actually what should happen long term, because of highways crossing municipal boundaries, subways and transit system crossing municipal boundaries, sewer systems, water systems, and the fact that we actually are a GTA, a metropolitan region that is far wider. She recommended, interesting enough, Mississauga, Brampton being merged into one city. But further than that, all of Halton being merged into a city, all of York being merged into a city, and all of Durham being merged into a city, such that the 29 cities and municipalities and regions in around the Greater Toronto area actually become 5. Toronto and the 4 regions surrounding it, and that entity end up having a GTA council that would meet on a fairly regular basis to deal with regional-wide issues. Now, she did say things at the periphery, like maybe Caledon or Halton Hills or something like that, should maybe join the more rural regions that are north of them rather than necessarily the more urban regions. But she said, why is Oakville, Burlington, Milton all separate municipalities? Why shouldn't they be one? Why is Mississauga? And think about Mississauga and Brampton. If they were together, they'd be the 3rd largest city in Canada. And her argument is Mississauga and Brampton would get a far more attention from a federal standpoint if it was the 3rd largest city in Canada versus vying back and forth for the 6th largest city in Canada. And that a lot of the things that we're talking about really are that we're one city. I mentioned this to Hazel McCallion at one point in time, and she said, Brian, everyone knows it's the right thing to do, but politically it's a disaster, and we'd all lose our jobs if we'd recommend it. And so therefore politics destroys what's actually the right decision. What do you think of that, sir?
I was literally going to say the exact same thing. So what you're talking about is the same thing that went through Toronto and the Harris government, right? When they amalgamated the other municipalities there. And broadly in Ontario, the Harris government took a bunch of different municipalities and tried to make them more efficient through the same principles you're talking about. And I think fundamentally speaking, it makes sense in theory. It makes more sense in regional coordination, especially because we don't really have a strong formalized regional coordination body across the GTHA. One could say that is the province of Ontario, but that's a different conversation. But fundamentally, how do you manage the politics of that? How do you go tell Mississauga residents who have a strong identity in Mississauga, how do you go tell Brampton residents who have a strong identity with Brampton that, sorry, you're not going to be a thing anymore. We're just going to be one big thing. So the politics are so difficult. But in principle, in academia, in theory, sure, makes more sense. Will improve regional coordination for sure.
But isn't that the same thing that happened in the 1970s when Hazel McCallion actually opposed the amalgamation of Streetsville, Cooksville, Clarkson, Port Credit, et cetera, into the city of Mississauga? And she opposed it like crazy. And then when it happened, she ran and became the mayor of Mississauga.
That's right. So, I mean, I guess to your question, does does the province want to get into this fight right now? Even if you're able to convince them that this is the right thing to do, I don't think their political calculation would show this is the fight they want to get into at this moment in time. And fundamentally speaking, I think that's where this conversation sort of dies.
That's the problem is they need the suburban voters to vote for them. Otherwise, they won't win government. So I think everyone knows it's the right thing, but politics gets in the way because of parochial desires and attitudes. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in 2 minutes with Saad Baig. Back in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Real pleasure tonight to be chatting with Saad Baig, who's a strategy consultant with Strategy Corp, downtown Toronto. Really excellent organization that provides advice to companies and municipalities and people about what's going on from a strategy standpoint in politics and in business. I've worked with them in regards to transit and municipal issues, and I've been very impressed with them, and always been impressed with Saad and his knowledge of what's going on in politics. And so let's switch, if we could, Saad, to provincial. What do you think about Premier Ford and what he's been doing? He won the election based on being Captain Canada and that he was the best person to stand up to Trump. And yet, now it would appear it's all a federal issue and that the provincial premier is really not all that involved. Some of the bills that he's passed of late have been sort of trampling on the rights of a whole bunch of different people because he wants to be able to get things done. What's your assessment of where the provincial government is right now?
So I think the premier remains popular, and the core, if you unpack that on why, because to your point, there's many stakeholders and a variety of issues that have different opinions, but the reality is the premier presents himself as a common sense solutions type of person, right? Get things done, and he sees an issue and he wants to tackle it, and whether sometimes it works out, and sometimes to his own admittance, it doesn't work out, and he changes his path, but he's seen to be trying to tackle the big issues. And I think that's the biggest difference between typical politicians and Premier Ford and what makes him likable among enough people in the electorate to keep on reelecting him in majority governments. He tries to tackle challenges and he pivots if he needs to. And he tells the public, if I did something wrong, well, I screwed up on this thing and we're going to try something else now. And it makes him very unique. Like in the last 6 or 7 months ago, as you alluded to, obviously, Trump and tariffs was a really big conversation. The federal government was a lame duck government with the prime minister of the time stating that he's not going to run again. So guess what? The premier stood up and he took on the issue that everybody wanted somebody to take on in the vacuum of leadership in the federal level. And to be frank, the premier has been able to work with people across the aisle. Like I often tell people, like, if you look at the last few years, he's been able to work with some of his biggest political nemesis. If you look at the mayor of Toronto, Olivia Chow, I think he said something to the extent of Olivia Chow would be an unmitigated disaster if she won the mayor seat. Well, guess what? Her and the mayor of Toronto him and the mayor of Toronto have been working really well. They did a really big deal. He's been working well with the mayor of Vaughan, Stephen Del Duca, who also ran against him. In an interview a few months back, he said, Del Duca comes down to his home and they have cannolis in his backyard and they hang out like old buddies. Mayor of Hamilton, Andrew Horwath, hasn't had any hostility towards this premier. So the premier is good at working with people. He's good at trying to be pragmatic and not at being an ideologue. And he's good at taking on the big issues of the day, whether it be Trump and tariffs, and really trying to be the face and champion of folks. And I think that's part of the magic with this premier and why he keeps on getting reelected.
So you're an expert at politicians and politics and what makes great politicians. We think about what's happened to this guy. We had the Greenbelt scandal. We had the Science Center. We had Ontario Place. We had wait times in hospitals. The list could go on. But it seems like nothing sticks to him. And his affable nature, his ability to get along with people, is a vote winner in the end. Tell me about that. How does this guy become the Teflon man?
I'll give you a little story. So back in COVID, if you recall, long-term care homes were a big issue. The challenges in terms of care of folks there, management was the topic of the day, and the government of the day, led by the premier, this premier, was taking a lot of heat for it. I remember watching a press conference where his regular, I think, 1 o'clock press conference in COVID, and the media was pressing him hard on that issue. The premier teared up. and he talked about visiting his, I think it was his mother-in-law at a facility and talking to her through the glass and just like not, feeling helpless that he can't help her. Those are moments of genuineness that I think people see, right? And so when I saw that, and I saw the opposition party of the day continue to hammer the premier on a narrative that said you're somehow doing something intentionally bad to screw this sector, excuse my language, and then the people see him tear up when he's talking about being helpless to help these people. That humanity kicks in, right? People give him credit. They don't see a typical politician who's just spinning messaging left, right, and center. They see someone who's genuine and who's honest, and if he screws up, he says, "I screwed up." So that's the magic, right? That's why things don't stick to him, and I think that's the style of politicians people want. People don't want politicians who are going to recite key messages and not answer any questions.
So, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, some people would say is the opposite of what you've described. Incredibly partisan, incredibly, um, antagonistic at times to reporters, to people that don't agree with him, not taking responsibility for his mistakes, etc. But he came within 2 points of winning the prime ministership. So how do you assess him?
So that was a very different situation, right? You had like the that was the definition of a change election. If you were to come up with the most stereotypical change election where the public just wants the party of the day out, that was it. And the outcome that ended up happening was a miraculous outcome, if you ask me. So yeah, but part of the reason why I think some voters were not did not vote for Pierre is because of that. It's because of I think the tone that was coming out of his campaign, and because it was seemed to be partisan, not focused on the issues of the day and not being conciliatory. So if you look at where he was not able to win more seats, was around the 905 here in Ontario, where we all live, and folks in the 905 are moderates. They're centrists. They go back and forth, but if they see someone who has a tone that is not aligned to their values and too hostile, I think if you look at some of the sub-demographics, women voters, which is really interesting, voters or older voters then went liberal instead of conservative, which I found really, really interesting. And I was talking to one of my friends who's part of the CPC establishment, and his prognosis was that we banned our folks to go on CBC because we had this anti-CBC hostility. And guess where the old folks watch? Seniors are not reading Twitter and TikTok, they're watching CBC. And if they keep on getting the perspective of the other side, not the CPC, well, guess what? That's the narrative they're going to go towards. So there was the Pierre situation was unique, and some of the challenges that people have raised with his leadership style are probably the reason why he was unable to pull through in what was arguably the definition of a change election. And of course, you had a new leader, and the Trump dynamic threw it off as well. So I'm not undermining those considerations.
So the area that the demographic that he did the best in, I think the biggest change was young men. I'm not sure exactly how old you are, but 20 and 30-year-old young men seem to dramatically shift toward Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party. Why?
Because young people are frustrated. Young people are frustrated that in some cases they're doing better than their parents in terms of their job and their careers, but they can't afford half or a quarter of the home their parents can afford. And they need to, that frustration comes out in how they vote. So you had a party that basically said all of the challenges that you're facing around affordability, around crime, is the current government, or at that point, Justin Trudeau's fault. So most people, if they don't think their lives are going the way they want to, they need somebody to hold accountable, and they all held the government of the day accountable. And I think Pierre got the votes of young people not because they were inspired by a solution that he was putting forward. It's because he laid out the problem as they saw it, and the other side kept on trying to message out of the problem.
So how do you think Carney's going to do? And what would be your recommendation for him if you sat down with him to reach out to young men?
So Carney does not have an easy path forward. Folks who voted for Carney voted for him primarily on his resume and his ability to tackle Trump and his understanding of global economics and geopolitics and the economy. But there's no simple solution. There's no button he can come and press that fixes all the challenges. So the folks I was talking about earlier who are frustrated about cost of living, affordability, crime, it's not that he can come in and put on his central banker hat and press a button and all the solutions are gone. That the more comprehensive approaches and measures he's going to put in place will take time to make an impact. So I think come next cycle, like the issues won't change, and it's not going to be easy for him. So one of the things I think he needs to look at is unpack the results and see where he lost and why he lost. Uh, in the 905 where I'm from, if you look at some of the data points, he lost a seat in Brampton. He lost some seats in York region. I think there's 3 or 4 seats there. And what are some of the biggest issues in those areas? Well, guess what? Crime and affordability. So on crime, I felt that the Liberal Party was not perceived to have the baseline effort on. So they really need to refocus on their narrative and message around that. And I think they also need to strike a balance between the academic government-y talk around how we're going to fix the budgets and the economy versus the more grassroots approach of talking about these issues and being empathetic to people. So tone will be as important as any substance. And I fear that the prime minister, given his background, will be more focused on substance and less on tone. And that may not pay dividends come the next election.
Many people say you got to manage expectations. Seems like he's not doing it. He's saying we're going to have the best economy in the G7. Is that a problem for him?
100%, I think, because back to my point earlier, like this problem is not going to be solved in 2, 3, 4 years when the next election is. So you need to start managing expectations, and you need to start like as much as he wants to change the way government works, and he has a 7-point plan that he laid out in his mandate letters to all his ministers, and they sound like really core issues. Tone and his rhetoric will be just as important. Why was Pierre so successful? Did Pierre have solutions to all the problems of the day? No, but on tone, he knocked it out of the park. For 2 years, he was running 15, 20 points ahead because he kept on talking about those issues. And but I know it's easier for opposition to do that.
That tone was a very antagonistic tone, and people liked it for a while, but then they saw that tone reflected in Donald Trump, and they responded negatively toward it and wanted a more conciliatory, work together kind of tone. Did they not?
Yes. So I think when I say tone, I don't mean be angry and hostile. I mean be empathetic and talk about the issues. People are struggling and they want to hear their politicians say, I hear you. Like, I understand your concerns. The risk with the prime minister is he's so focused on the specifics, he may be talking more about how he's going to address those issues. And the average folks may not be able to comprehend all sorts of government gymnastics and how to fix the economy and things like operating and capital budgets and all that type of stuff. So in addition to doing that, which are I do believe our politicians need to take on these issues substantively. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but publicly, he needs to learn how to be more retail in his communications.
Saad Baig, thank you so much. This has been great. We're going to take a final break, and come back with some concluding comments with our political activist and strategy consultant, Saad Baig, in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio. I've got Saad Baig with me tonight. He is a strategy consultant with Strategy Corp. We've been talking about Mississauga, Peel, Ontario, and Canada politics. Let me talk about the people and on the upcoming election. So, Saad, tell me, who do you think are going to be the leaders of the different parties federally and provincially in the next election? Are Pierre Poilievre and the leader of the Liberal Party provincially going to be able to keep their jobs and run in the next election, or are they going to be replaced?
So starting federally, of course, the prime minister is going to be on the ballot in the next cycle. Well, it's not a certainty, but it's highly probable. Pierre is running in a riding, I think, in Alberta, and he's going to win that riding. It's a strong conservative riding. He'll be back in the House. It seems that, at least from what I'm hearing, there is enough support among caucus and the party establishment to stick around with Pierre, even though that party is known for kicking out leaders after every cycle. But this time, I think, given that their popular vote went out, they had a strong seat projection, and they came in, they held the government to a minority. Pierre is going to be on the ballot. And of course, on the NDP side, they're having a leadership race. Provincially is interesting. I think there's more uncertainty at the provincial level. The premier won his third majority government. Is he going to go for a fourth majority government? It's very, very, very hard to win 4 majority governments anywhere, whether federally or in Ontario. Lots of conversations around whether he sticks around. So I think I would not be surprised if Doug Ford is not on the ballot as the PC leader in the next cycle. For the Liberal Party, I think that's also an interesting conversation. They're leading into a leadership review this fall. There are people out there who are seeding the narrative that there should be a change in leadership. Whether that side's going to win or not is to be determined. I think fundamentally it'll be up to the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party whether she wants to stick around or not. I think if she wants to move on, she probably doesn't. She probably announces that before the leadership review. I don't see a scenario where she goes into the leadership review uh, and doesn't come out successful in whatever that metric is that you define success, because she would know where the wins are at. If she feels that the leadership review in the fall is not going to go her way, I think she steps out in advance. But that's a determination she needs to make. So I think I go back to if Bonnie's on if Bonnie goes into the leadership review, she'll probably stay on as leader. If she doesn't, then of course there's going to be a new leadership race. And we have Nate Erskine-Smith, who ran for the leadership last time. He was in the federal cabinet, and then after the shuffle, he wasn't. So he wasn't too happy about it, as he articulated on Twitter. So he may take another crack at it. There's some conversations around other folks who may take a crack at it as well. Coming to Mississauga, I think almost certainly Carolyn Parrish runs again in 2026. Whether she's going to be contested in a strong manner or she'll walk away because there won't be any strong candidate is to be determined. I think it'll really depend on how the next year goes. It is possible somebody on council runs against her again, but let's see.
I think it's going to be an interesting couple of years in politics, and hopefully you'll come back and check in with me again. This has been a great conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you to Saad Baig for joining us from Strategy Consultants, Strategy Corp. I think that I think it's going to be interesting. I think that there's a lot of people within the Conservative Party, the Red Tories, the progressive side of that really were supporting Pierre Poilievre because they wanted power. And they thought that, the polls were so positive that they gave him that chance. And yet they were uncomfortable with his extremist positions, his antagonistic attitudes, and some of the premiers in conservative premiers in other governments that were conservative across the country were sort of the best examples of how he didn't make friends. And so I think that even though he is probably undoubtedly going to win the election in the Alberta riding, I think he's going to be challenged in a leadership review. And I think it's that Joe Clark issue of, if you get over 50%, but you don't get that 2/3, it's up to you to decide, but what are you going to do? And then I think that the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party is probably going to be faced with a similar situation. And I think Saad is right that, a smart leader makes a decision before they end up getting that result, but not everyone does. They try hard. And then the results come in. And, you think about, getting 50 or 60%, but not 2/3 or not 75%. What does that say if you've got such a strong minority of the party not supporting you? And I think she won by like 51% on the fourth ballot or something like that. So it's going to be a challenge there. And I think that, one of the things that happened in the last Mississauga by-election is that several different members of council ran because they could, because if they didn't win, they still had their seats on council. I think that the risk in a general election is if you are in council and you run and you lose, you're out of a job. And so I think that if Carolyn Parrish runs, it's going to be probably a easy or far easier route for her because there's not going to be as much opposition from other council members. So it'll be interesting to see. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online from all over PL and the GTA at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.